Yeah, I'm kind of curious.
Yes. Today's message, twofold. One is about angels in heaven. That's going to be the first part. And then God, Satan, and me, and a sledgehammer. Right? The sledgehammer. So everyone can see. Oh! I don't expect any dissension this morning. No, seriously, I want to begin with a couple stories from this book. 1,000 Shall Fall. It is the story of a Seventh-day Adventist couple living in Frankfurt, Germany during World War II. The Seventh-day Adventists, of course, kept the Sabbath day or Saturday as their Sabbath, and as did the Jews. So many times in Germany during that World War II, the Seventh-day Adventists were grouped together with the Jewish people. And we know that the Jews were severely persecuted, rounded up, shot, and this also happened to many of the Seventh-day Adventists. Well, this man, his name was Franz Hasel, H-A-S-E-L, Hasel. F sounds like a Z. Anyway, when he was 17 years old and he was a Seventh-day Adventist, he got drafted into the German army. He was a conscientious objector, but at that time he had to report or he would be shot. So he reported to the army. He would not join the political party, which later became the Nazi party. And he said he had to keep the Sabbath. He had to have Sabbaths off. Well, this was during World War I. We're not going to give you the Sabbath off during a war. You're going to be out there with your gun, and you're going to be out hunting down and killing the enemy. Unfortunately, he learned how to use his gun, and he sniper status. So they had him as a sniper. Well, that's going to create a problem because he's a conscientious objector. He doesn't want to go around killing people just because he can hit the target with his rifle. But then he prayed about it, and God opened up a way that he could still serve in the German army, but not be out on the battlefront. They needed someone in their office that knew how to build bridges and roads, because the German army needed bridgeways and roads so that they could move their heavy military equipment into enemy territory. So they found out in high school that he had taken courses in engineering, and so he got to develop plans for the bridges and the roads. Now, some might say, well, aren't you still contributing to the war? And I guess, in a sense, he was. But what was the alternative? He would be shot. So he did what he could, and he served his time, and then he was discharged for the army. So he thought his army duties were over. No, not so fast, not so easy. After World War II, what happened in Germany? Adolf Hitler's political power or party came into power. And Adolf Hitler's policy was he wanted to rule the whole world. In 1940, Franz got an official letter from the Nazi Party. You will report for active duty such and such a time, such and such a place. What? He objected. He wrote a letter back. I've already served my military service. I'm a married man, and I have 3 children. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and I'm a conscientious objector. Do you think he got out of his service? No, no. They wanted him. So he had to report to the Army, and in the meantime, he left his wife and the 3 children there in Frankfurt, Germany, and he went off to help build bridges and roads. First, he was assigned to Austria, because that's one of the first countries that the Germans invaded, and then Poland, and then later into France. And all this time, he was in the forefront of the fight, because before the Germans could bring their large tanks into the territory, they had to build bridges and make roads. And so he was always in the forefront. He, at the risk of death, he had to carry a rifle and a handgun. But he decided, well, I have to carry them, but I don't have to load them. So, but he was very careful that his superiors didn't see, because they gave him a hard time, because they knew he was a conscientious objector, and they knew he's a Seventh-day Adventist. And one of the stipulations when he first went into the Army, the second time, I will keep the Sabbath, I will work every other opportunity, but from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, I will keep the Sabbath. I will not work. And miraculously, every Friday evening, something came up that his platoon could not advance or do any work. One time there was a heavy rainstorm, and so the troops couldn't move anyway. And so he, with his Bible, he went out and he prayed, had his private worship service. His handgun, he took the bullets out and put them in his pockets, but he had to have his handgun. And then one day they were along a river, and he was thinking, I sure don't like to carry this handgun where everybody can see it. I'm going to throw this handgun into the river. Oh, wait, if I do that, they'll notice I don't have a handgun, and they're going to assassinate me. They'll just take me out and shoot me, because that's what they had done to some of their own troops, especially if they had any Jewish background. He had seen them just line them up and shoot them down. So he decided, I'll carve me a wooden gun that looks like the real gun. I'll paint it black so it'll blend in with my holster, and then they'll think I have a real gun. They never noticed. He went through all the war with that handgun, and never once did he ever have to use his rifle or pretend to use his handgun. Meanwhile, back home, his wife, Helen, and his 3 children, they were living in an apartment complex in Frankfurt, Germany. And this was 1940. U.S. joined the war in 1941. 1942, and the bombers came over and just bombed out all the cities. But in Frankfurt, a miracle continued to happen. The rest of the city was demolished. No food supply, no water, no electricity. It was just like total destruction, except for one part of the city. What part do you think that was? A 6-unit apartment complex where Helen and her 3 children lived. The bombs would come so close and the explosions would be so dramatic that most of the times the glass or the material for the windows would be blown out. And if it's in wintertime, they'd try to find cardboard or something to kind of board it up so it wouldn't be so cold. But God protected Helen and the 3 children while Franz was off fighting in World War II. Well, one time, Helen ran out of food. They had no food, nothing. Food was rationed. They could only buy like 1 loaf of bread for a month or something like that. And the Nazi government enforced that. There was some sources for food on the black market, but it was illegal, and if caught, they would be killed. But she had prayed about it, and she knew of a family that lived 40 miles away that lived on a farm. And she prayed, and God inspired her to go to that family and explain her situation and see if she could get some food. So it took her 3 days to travel the 40 miles. She had to be very careful that she was not caught, because what she was doing was strictly illegal. She was not supposed to leave Frankfurt at all. The trains, if they did run, were always crowded, and there were always armed officers there to make sure that no one illegally boarded the train. So she had to walk the 40 miles, and when she got there, the people were very receptive, and they loaded up a big gunny sack of food, more than 80 pounds, and she was just a small lady, probably like maybe the size of Cynthia. Anyway, and there was a snowstorm, a blizzard, and she wanted to start out for home because she knew the children were there. They were hungry. They didn't have any water. Nobody there to care for them. And the oldest was like 10 and 8 and 6. And so she started out all on her own. And I'll skip a lot of the story. She got about 5 miles to her apartment complex there in Frankfurt. And she had been out in the snow, walking in that heavy snow, and she didn't have the right shoes for being out in a blizzard, or didn't have the right clothing. And she saw a tree. And she knew she had to keep going. She couldn't go to sleep, because she knew if she went to sleep, she'd never wake up. She would freeze to death. But she was so tired, she thought, I'll just lay back on this tree and I'll rest for 5 minutes. What happened? She went to sleep. And then, just a few minutes later, maybe 10 minutes later, she heard an army truck. It was loud. It woke her up. And there was a big German who was driving that army truck. Oh, wow. Now she was in big trouble. Number one, she was out there illegally. And two, she had gone to the black market to get food. And she just knew she was going to be shot on the spot. But this big German officer, he surmised the situation. He saw her bag of food, and he helped her into the truck and put her food bag into the truck. And then he said, let me massage you and get you warmed up, get you thawed out before I turn the heater on full blast, because Terry, you all know the medical reason, but I don't. But anyway, he got her circulation going and whatever, and then he turned the heater up into the truck, and after she was there a while, she fell fast asleep, and he drove through that blizzard the last 5 miles and delivered her right up to her house. Somehow he knew right where to go. He went there, knocked on the door. The 10-year-old opened the door. The German officer helped Mother out of the big army truck into the house, brought her food in, and closed the door. And the mother, she thought, I didn't thank that officer. So she went outside to thank the officer, and what do you think she found?
Nothing.
There was no truck. There was no German officer. There were no snow tracks. And she knew it was an answer to prayer that an angel brought her home. Now, the non-believer, didn't happen. But those who know the power of God and believe in angels and miracles, we know that it did happen. Well, Franz, after he was released from the army, he was never wounded. He was not physically hurt. When he got back to Frankfurt, he decided he was going to dedicate his life fully to God and become a call porter and give Bible studies and be a pastor. Well, the city was bombed out. Nobody had any money. How's he going to support himself by being a call porter? But he left it, he made his decision, he left it up to God. Long story coming to the end. Eventually, he and his wife immigrated to the United States, and he continued to be a pastor in the United States. And their youngest daughter, she was born toward the close of World War II. Her name was Susie, and she became the registrar at Pacific Union College in Angwin, California. And you can read, there's an epilogue in the back of this book. You can read about their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So it's certainly a good book. And I don't know how we got it in our library. I don't see any name or anything in it. But Gail wants to read it next, and then after her, then if anyone else is interested. Okay, part one. Heaven. What can we say about heaven? I was just thinking to myself, well, what are some popular songs? I'm thinking about secular songs, not religious songs, but secular songs that mention heaven.
Heaven is a place on earth.
Pardon?
Heaven is a place on earth.
Okay, is that a secular?
It's the lyrics in a song.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Is that a secular song? It is.
Probably.
When I was just looking at it.
How about this? It was popular. Heaven's just a sin away. How can heaven be a sin away? No, heaven, there's not going to be any sin in heaven. Wrong message.
I think they mean you got heaven, but you're gonna. I mean, you lose it. You know, it's just one sin and it's gone.
Yeah.
No, that's not what they meant.
This is the lyrics.
Yes.
Heaven, you know,
Oh,
it's just to stay away because
That was the interpretation. Okay. Now, Owen, you might not be quite old enough for this next song, but Eric might.
Stairway to heaven.
Pardon?
Stairway to heaven.
Yeah, Stairway to Heaven. Who Led Zeppelin, I think it was, and I read through all of the lyrics to the song, and I'm not sure just exactly what it's talking about. Talking about some euphoric experience that you have that takes your spirit on up into heaven. But we know we're going to have our literal bodies up in heaven, not just a spirit. And then another one, knocking on heaven's door. Yeah. I never was into heavy metal or metal. I think some of my kids were into it, but I just thought, all of those kind of give the wrong interpretation of what heaven really is. I found a book at Adventist book. Well, no, it wasn't either. It was at the Portland Adventist Community Services there in Portland, Oregon. And it was called Heaven. It was a compilation of Ellen White writings about the subject of heaven. And it still had the shrink wrap on the book, and I turned the book over, and I saw the ABC stamp on it for the price, $15.95, and I thought, now, who would have donated a book on heaven? It was never opened, and so no one had read that particular copy, and I thought, well, who may have donated that? Who do you think may have? I don't know who donated it. I don't know how they got it, but who might give that book away?
Relative to a person that died.
Pardon?
Relative to a person that died.
Yeah, that's the one I thought. It was probably given maybe to an older person for encouragement, and that person died, and the older person didn't have an opportunity to read the book, and the children weren't interested in it. It was a religious book, so they just donated it to the ABC. Or I was thinking, maybe it could be that I purchased the book and I gave it to my neighbor, and my neighbor knew that I was a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, and his lifestyle did not reflect an interest in religion or Christianity, and so he just gave the book away. I loved that little book. Not mistakenly. I purposely took it to a new believers class and was reading it. I used to teach a new believers class there in Portland. And there was a man named Jim, and he generally came to the class with me, and we would discuss different topics. And his life was a mess. I won't go into it, but a total mess. He was living with his daughter. They didn't get along, but she was going to evict her own father. And anyway, he said, "What's that book that you're reading?" And I said, "It's heaven, all about heaven." And for some reason, something inspired me to give away that little book. Oh, I knew that. I didn't want to give it away. Jim could get his own book, but no, something inspired me to give it to him. And so I did. The contents of that little book, Heaven, it's available. It came out in 2003, so it's 20 years old. But the first chapter, Way to Heaven, and then you go on down, and who will be there? Some that are already in heaven, some who will not be there, and then on down. And I just printed off a few pages, and I'll just read just a little bit of excerpts from this. And these are the words of Ellen White, that she's also using the Bible as her source. There are not many ways to heaven. Each one may not choose his own way. Jesus says, "I am the way, and no man cometh unto the Father but by me." And then, just skipping down, he gives us power to obey. Jesus said, "I am that I am." That's kind of hard to understand. And Jesus also said, "I am the good shepherd. I am the living bread. I am the way, the truth, and the life." And then many are losing the right way in consequence of thinking that they must climb to heaven. Can I do anything at all in my lifetime to get me one step closer to heaven? Can I work my way to heaven?
No.
Can I give enough funds to get to heaven?
No.
They seek to make themselves better by their unaided efforts. And this is what Ellen White said. This they can never accomplish. It was Jesus that said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." If by any effort of our own we could advance one step toward the ladder, the words of Christ would not be true. So Jesus is the only way to heaven. Okay. Any dissension this morning? Boom! Right over your head. Now, I brought this because there are texts in the Bible that tells us, let's see, I gotta find out where there was, let's see, got too many pages of notes and stuff. Maybe that's all that I wrote anything else. I don't guess so. John 3:16. We all know that, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And then Acts 16:31. Who wrote the book of Acts, do we think? Luke. Dr. Luke. And he said, believe on the Lord, and you will have eternal life. And then Ephesians 2:8, I think all of us know that. By grace through what? Faith, we are saved. It's grace, and then based upon our faith in Jesus. And then Mark, John Mark, he's the one who started out on a missionary journey with Paul and maybe it was Silas, I forget, or Barnabas, one of Paul's associates. Anyway, and he got to a certain place and he got discouraged and he left and went back home. And Paul, in several places, he kind of just discounted Mark because he had backed out of going on the full missionary journey. But John Mark wrote a book of the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So Mark was pretty instrumental in the New Testament. He added, believe and be baptized. Now, baptism is just a symbol that we believe and have accepted Jesus. And then Jesus, this rich young ruler, we all know that story. Jesus said, sell all, give to the poor, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. But God has not asked everybody to do that. There has to be some people that are staying at home and helping pay the utilities and the magazines that we send out and so forth. Okay, for about 5 minutes. I'm standing before the bar of God. God's here. God is over here. Jesus is here. But Satan is over here. And now, I don't believe this is going to be literal because Jesus is going to plead our case to the Father. Plead, I think, is too strong of a word because the Father wants us in heaven. That's why he gave Jesus. But conversation goes something like this. And Satan picks up his sledgehammer, whatever he might have. And God says, Brother Morris, it's time for you to be accountable for all of your life's actions. And Jesus said, oh, but Father, he loved me and I forgave him all of his sins. He is my son. He's your son. Through my grace, he will be admitted into heaven. The old devil, he gets up this way. Not so fast, God. I've got a few items I'd like to present in my defense. You see, God, I was going over Brother Morris's record very carefully, and I noticed that he only gave 9.5%, not 10, 9.5%, and your word clearly says 10 on his gross income. And Jesus, hold it there. Wait just a minute. It said 10% of your increase. And the devil said, no, it's 10% of the gross. And Brother Morris, he came way short of that standard. And Jesus says, I accept him. He is my servant, and he will be with me in heaven. And then the old devil, he gets up the sledgehammer. Not so fast. You know, I know a few things about Brother Morris that maybe not everyone understood. You see, when he was a pastor back there in the former time, his Signs of the Times and these Times subscriptions did not come up to the conference standard. Every church had so many subscriptions they were supposed to have each year, and the pastors were accountable for that. And Brother Dave, he failed in those subscriptions, and Jesus said, "Oh no, God, that's okay. That's okay." What about his baptisms? 20 baptisms a year. That's the minimum. And Jesus says, "Well, I do recall Brother Dave having an evangelistic series there in a small town in Oklahoma, and there were 3 people that he baptized. And I know of another occasion he baptized a mother and her grandson, but the old devil says, but that's not 20. That's only 5. And that was over a course of 2 years, not one year. And then Jesus says, "Well, Brother Dave, he helped with those meetings in Tulsa when all the pastors of the area, I think there were like 13 of us, and Fortis Dedmore had the evangelistic service, and there were 100 baptized, literally. Well, let's see, 100 divided by 13, and that's only about 7, 8, say 5 and 8, 13. That's not 20. That's not 20. You're not going to take him. Wait. Brother Morris loved me. He did all that he could while he was a pastor. But I could see that Brother Dave's temperament was better suited to be a teacher. He didn't like self-promotion. He didn't like to stand up and recount all the miracles I worked when he was a pastor, which I did. You remember Brother Dave was instrumental in that Indian woman giving that 2 acres of prime real estate along the highway there, so that the Pauls Valley Seventh-day Adventist church could be built. But the old devil, he says, "Yeah, but Brother Dave, he was not a builder. He didn't get that church built. It took 7 years for that church to become a reality." But Jesus says, "Oh, I accept his efforts. He's a child of mine. And no matter what you might say against him, I am taking him to heaven." Now, I don't believe for an instant that I'm going to be standing before a judgment bar of God in a literal sense like that. But Satan would like to do everything possible to discourage us, to get us to think we just don't measure up. But that's not important. I don't have to measure up. I will never measure up. It's only because Jesus did it for us. Coming to church this morning, that doesn't get me any closer, but it puts me in a company of believers, and I gain spiritual strength by being here. But it's only by Jesus that I can get to heaven. And our closing